forward to the discussions. We'd like to briefly introduce to you the IMF. So if I may share a video, a very short 1 minute video about IMF. Um, Fadli, are you able to hear the sound?
Yes, I can hear it. Yes.
Okay, let me play it again.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I hope you saw that video. So this is one of the series of the International Metropolitan Fellowship. So we've developed the Metro X. Can you hear me, Fadli? You can
Yes, I
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Okay, good.
Would you open your camera?
I can't. I'm sharing.
Oh, okay.
I'm sharing. Yeah, I'm sharing right now. Yeah. So just wanted this very briefly. Just wanted to share about the Metro X. What we will be doing today. I know Padley keeps on saying that this is a webinar, but we've developed the Metro X to be an non-traditional webinar. We want this to be as engaging as possible. What's the purpose? We want to create a platform for collective intelligence exchange where we share ideas and lessons learned from different metropolitan areas. So what's the outcome? We want this to be an open and informal but structured discussion. I hope we can, given the time, discuss as much aspects as possible. It's open to everyone, and hope you enjoy the discussions. So before we move forward, I'd like to promote also there's another Metro X series coming up in about an hour after this Metro Jakarta event, so you can also join it. So with that, I turn over to Fadli. Enjoy the discussions and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, as the president of IMF International Metropolitan Fellowship, to opening our webinar tonight. So our theme, as I mentioned before, is titled "Lesson Learned from Rio de Janeiro to the Reposition of Metropolitan Jakarta if the capital relocated." So my name Fadli, as the Indonesian representative at IMF, suggested this theme of webinar because I think it's important to Jakarta provincial city government to learn from the experience that happened in Rio de Janeiro during their relocation of the capital. So without further ado, I give the floor to the first presenters. First is the first I give opportunities to Dani Mutakin as the chairman of Indonesian Association of Urban Planners Jakarta chapter. So to Mr. Dani Mutakin, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fadli.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning in Europe and America. Yeah, I think my name is Dani Mutakin. Currently, I the chairman of Indonesia Association of Planners for DKI Jakarta chapter. Uh, Thank you for having me this evening. I'm very honored to attend the IMF invitation at this Metro X forum. So maybe my time is about 10 minutes or 15.
15 minutes, Dani.
Okay.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Uh, Can I share screen?
Okay. Can you?
Yeah. Can you see this, my presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. First, I want to share about the Jakarta, the post-capital city, when the capital is arranged to move to the Kalimantan. I think the timeline is delayed due to the COVID, but everything is on the track by the President of Jokowi, and maybe about 2 or 3 years, next 3 years, it will be happen. I don't know. Everything depends on the situation at this pandemic. First of all, maybe I want to introduce about my city, Jakarta. About Greater Jakarta, Jakarta is the most challenging city for controlling urbanization. We can see here about the map, and we call the Greater Jakarta as Jabodetabek. Jakarta, Tangerang, Depok, and Bekasi, with the population about in Jakarta itself 10 million, and for the Greater Jakarta is 32 million. And it makes one of the biggest metropolitan in the globe, yeah. And this is the condition about our city. And what the challenges we facing. First is transportation problem, yeah. With population about in the Greater Jakarta is 30 million, and the total vehicle is about 24 million. And the use of public transport is still few, just about 2%, and the private car is 23%, and motorcycle dominate about 75%. So if you have visit Jakarta, you can, before pandemic, of course, it will be very crowded in the weekdays. And at least 49 million people are commute per day in the Greater Jakarta area. And the second problem is floods. You see, the capacity of the Jakarta drain system is only for 100 millimeter per day rainfall. And if the rainfall is higher than 100 millimeter per day, it will causing flood. And in the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, the extreme rainfall is reached 2026 millimeter per day. It's the highest in the last 100 years. So we can see the new area of flood is here, the purple one, yeah, Pasar Minggu, Sunter Hulu, Halim, Lebak Bulus is in extreme rainfall. So it's the new normal for Jakarta, and maybe this is one of the effect of climate change. And also we're facing sea level rise and land subsidence. And today we saw in the newspaper that also the President of United States, Joe Biden, mentioned Jakarta, that Jakarta, if there is no action, significant action, it will be inundated more than 30 or 40% in 2050. So this is a very serious problem in Jakarta. And also, we're facing high rate of urbanization. Maybe 65% living in the urban area right now, and only 35% is still live in the rural area. And if there's move for the next few years, it will be growth over more and more. The fifth is about the housing demand and backlog. Okay. Based on data Susenas 2017, only half of the population of DKI Jakarta owns property, and the others of 50% resident doesn't own and concentrate in 40,000 of the poor. There are several causes by why the people cannot have the property is the of the increasing rate of population migrate into the capital, limited land availability, high land prices, and the wage of Jakarta workers who growth doesn't not parallel with land prices. And the backlogs, there are 1.2 million Jakarta residents who does not own home. So residential needs will continue to be challenged in the near future. The next, we move to the Jakarta Post Capital. I try to find out about the 10 countries who move their capital. First in India, Australia, Brazil, maybe nanti later it will explain. Pakistan, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Myanmar, South Korea, and Indonesia, maybe in the few years. We can see that, at this data that there are no old capital that decline in its first 10 years. And also after until current condition, there are no capital that decline. Every capital that move, the old capital is still growth and growth. The old capital still growth in terms of population and economic condition. And the old capital has a solid basic culture, social, economic, and infrastructure, and growth organically for more than 100 years. So when the capital move, it still have a very strong basic. And we also can see about the case of the Kolkata, India. Why I choose the Kolkata, because maybe it's quite similar with Jakarta. Kolkata is the capital of British era in India. We can see in 100 years ago, it's the main city in India. And after the 100 years, it's still the biggest, one of the biggest city in India. And New Delhi in 100 years ago is number 7, but now is number 2 after Mumbai. But the Kolkata is still growth and growth. And now we move back again to our Jakarta. This is the calculation from the national government that asset in Jakarta, the national government asset in Jakarta is but 1,123 trillion rupiah, and if the capital relocation will coverage an area about 3 kilometers square with the valuation about 150 trillion. So when the capital move, it will be potential for partnership development between private sector or with Jakarta government and private sector, Jakarta government, or maybe for green open spaces. And if we see the national government offices in Jakarta, we can see the red dot here. This is the scattered location for the national ministry with the land coverage 1.3 billion, and the total workers is about 1 billion. And maybe when capital move, the worker will move. I don't know, it will be 100% or 50%, but it will reduce about 1 billion resident in Jakarta and greater area. How after the Jakarta capital moved to Kalimantan, let's say 5 years after now, then we facing what will happen to Jakarta. This is the data from World Economic Forum 2019. In terms of population, Jakarta in 2035 will be #1 metropolitan. So maybe it just reduce a little from the worker who move to capital, but in general, the population Jakarta will still one of the biggest in the world in terms of population, and also Jakarta will have a growth quite big, 5.2% for annual growth, GDP annual growth, and this data maybe before the pandemic, but because the pandemic is coverage the whole global, I think it we can see is the general data. So in terms of population and GDP growth, Jakarta will still have a strong position. And I think the one question is, how about the new capital? Will it in 100 years can be like New Delhi or something? That's a big question mark. So
excuse me, you have only 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the milestone of the national development and global megatrend in the next maybe 100 years ahead. Yeah, we have a very different culture, more vertical living, urban farming, underground, and financial and technology will affect to our city. And this is maybe our analysis for the positioning Jakarta for the cost capital. Jakarta will still be a global city in Indonesia and will be center of business, finance, services, tourism, and convention. And also smart, sustain, and livable. We move forward to smart, sustain, and livable city. And we have to enhance infrastructure and also skilled people, image and quality of life and attraction if we want to stay at the as the strong city in Indonesia and in the world. And second is the public transport development. Right now, implementation of MRT Pas 2, Bundaran HI and Kampung Bandan. Next, implementation of MRT Pesti, Balaraja Cikarang, and LRT, and also integration public transport planning development to Jakarta spatial planning is very important. And also, this is the development of transit and oriented development. We have to make sure that Jakarta TOD concept that begin about 5 years and ahead is have to be ideal. Connectivity of moda transit, mixed use, infrastructure, open spaces, pedestrian, public and social facilities. And we have to avoid just the mark of TOD as gimmick, housing near the transit. The 4 is land consolidation program. We have to move to vertical consolidation land program, which can be implemented at several kampongs area as built to rumah susun. Also, we have to apply limited and restrictive development for the areas. It is the image from NASA about 30 years ago, and this is right now. Yeah, we can see the green area is becoming the built area. We have to limit development must apply at southern Jakarta, and restricted development must be applied for activities which require massive groundwater uses. And last is we have in national program, Jakarta Urban Regeneration Program. It will coverage the water development, transportation, flood management and water supply, housing program, and wastewater management. In the total of budget 571 trillion, but maybe it will be implemented in the long term. But maybe in this case of pandemic, it will be restructured. That's my presentation. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Mr. Dhani Mutakin, to presenting the Jakarta Metropolitan City about the relocation and suggestion of after the capital relocated. So to all participants of this webinar, if you have any questions, you can put questions in the chat column, or maybe you can ask by yourself later after the second speaker finish the presentation. So without further ado, let's move to the second speaker, Mr. Sid Blanco Jr. Hello, Sid.
Hello.
Hello, Sid. So Sid is a senior consultant of urban planning from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He was involved in the planning and process of the relocation of Rio de Janeiro. Maybe you can start the presentation, Sid. Thank you. I'll give you 15 minutes.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah. Yeah, we can.
Okay, thank you all for being here with us today. I know we have people from different parts of the world, so we have different times. For me, it's good morning. For you in Indonesia, it's good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Pedro, for the invitation. It's good to see you here. I'm going to talk about what happened in Brazil in the 60s when Rio de Janeiro was not the capital of Brazil anymore after 200 years, and it was moved to Brasilia. And the impacts of this, I think it's felt until now. Rio really never recovered from it. I'm sure we are talking about other times, and this was 60 years ago, but it was innovative. It was important, but like always, because of political issues, it was fast and it was with lack of planning, which means we had several problems and we still have it. Let me show you a few things. This used to be Rio de Janeiro in the 60s as the capital of Brazil. So the whole city, it was what we call here in Brazil, the federal district. We are a federative government, so we have the nation, the states, the cities, and the federal district. So it's a different entity that's not considered not even a city or a state. So it works like a state, but in the same territory that you are a state, you work and you run as a city. So as the capital of the country, you have a lot of money going on in it, especially because it's the capital of the country for 200 years. And if you, in order to you to have an idea of the scale of the city of Rio, in the actual state of Rio, it's something like this. So this is the whole state of Rio de Janeiro, and then red, it was the federal district. It's only a city in terms of territory, and it has the same importance and rules as the whole white area that you're seeing. That was the state of Rio de Janeiro, that by that time had its capital in the city of Niterói. For those who know Rio de Janeiro, it's the city on the other side of the bay that you cross the bridge. It used to be the capital of the country. So what happened? You have a Rio here, close to the sea, beautiful place, and then suddenly you move it. The capital of the country 1,200 kilometers to the middle of the country in an area that it was quite rural by the time. It's still a little bit because it's an agriculture area, but can you imagine it in the 60s where Brazil was in the strong period of urbanization, and most of the big cities of the country, and when I say most, I can say more than 800%, they were all located close to the sea. Then suddenly, just like go west, national government decide to move the capital to this small square in the middle of the country. Logistics, I have lived in Brazilian and worked for the national government. It's perfect. You are at least 2.5 hours from any city in Brazil, from the important capitals. But on the other hand, you had to move a city that already existed for 200 times and in the 60s. So we are talking about of logistics totally different from the ones that we have today.
Nggak tahu sih, aku nggak dengerin juga.
So, you have to imagine that in the 60s, people that used to live in the capital of Rio, in the capital of Brazil, used to have this beautiful view. So this is Sugarloaf. I live here right now. I'm talking from here. This is from the Christ. And then you have the bay. Here is Niterói, that used to be the other capital. And then suddenly people were asked to move to here. This was Brasilia in 1960 in the opening day. So all public servers that used to work here, they have to move here and live here. So can you imagine you tell your wife and your kids that you're no longer going to live close to the beach and to the hills and have to move here? So it was quite hard, it was quite difficult. Like I told you, Rio was the capital for 200 years, and we still have this strong presence of national public offices and facilities. There are several buildings in the city that used to be minister of something, used to be the headquarters of national enterprise. So 80% of the population used to be public server. So there was a strong dependence on national funds. And when there's this move from the capital, from Rio to Brasilia, the federal district became a state. They thought that the best option that time, it would to convert a territory that has the size of a city into a whole state. And it took them 15 years to realize this is a strong mistake, because it was a state with only one city, which means that there's no diversity, there's no enough population to produce as a state. Then from the Brazilian state, that became a Brazilian city, and from Brazil's capital became Rio's capital, which means that Niterói, that used to be the capital of a state for 200 years, became nothing. It's only a city. Now, from that time until now, there are lack of national investments, because as you could see in the pictures, all the money went to Brasilia to be built. Rio economy, it was that time strongly devoted to public service, and from the 70s and 80s, it became very strong based on oil. So all the oil crisis around history took Rio's economy very strong. Manufacture industry was never investment that was held strongly in Rio. So Rio was always the place for public service and for oil industry. And it was totally clear from that time that there was no plan B for that, that tourism would be an option, because it was already the marvelous city. but tourism will never replace the amount of money needed to make the city continue work as it used to be. Even because the tourist area is not that big. It's a small bubble inside the city of Rio. We are talking about some beaches, the Christ, the Sugar Loaf, 5-6 museums, some old heritage, and it's over. Then you have Carnival, then you have New Year, but and it's something very interesting. Rio is not the most visited place in Brazil. It was never. It's the Iguaçu Falls. So even though everybody wants to come to Rio, it's not the most visited place for several reasons, and you know that violence is one of it. So I would like to show you the numbers of the population in the city of Rio from the time of the emperor until now, and it's very interesting what happened. So I remember I thought I told you that the 50s, the 60s was the strong urbanization period in Brazil. So everybody was leaving the countryside and going to the cities, and Rio was the capital. So everybody was going to Rio. And exactly just after the time that Rio is no longer the capital of the country, look what happens with the population. You can see by numbers from 6 to 7 and starts to decrease because what happens? Brazilian was being built, so facilities were becoming available, housing, schools, hospitals. So people had to move to Brasilia because they were supposed to work there or live their works. So Rio started to become empty, and the numbers of population, it's, if you compare with any other city in the country, it's amazing that the growth is not that big. So what happens after the 60s? Most of the national public service, they moved to Brasilia, not at the beginning. Some families, they remain here because there was no ways of living in Brasilia. So a lot of people spend months and years living in hotel rooms or sharing apartments until there are schools, supermarkets, bakery stores available to the families to live. There was a strong reduction in national investments in Brazil, in Rio. It's important to remember that in 1964, it was the beginning of the military governments in Brazil that remain until 1985. And all they have done in terms of urban development, it was a strong infrastructure and housing investments, not only in Rio, but in the whole country. And in Rio, you will see strong investments in roads, bridges, the subway, and in housing, slum eradication all around the touristic areas, and the construction of social housing in the peripheries, just like Seed of God, the housing complex that it's the movie worldwide known. So that story happens in the 60s. Families that used to live close to the beach, they were taken to 45, 6, 70 kilometers away, and a lot of housing complex being built in what is now the metropolitan area of Rio. So these dormitories, cities all around that used to be the capital of the country, it was they started to be built, and it was not built, but there was consolidated. It was consolidated after Rio was no longer the capital. Everybody knows the 80s economic crisis due to oil crisis, and of course Rio suffered a lot. And it's still a state, it's still a city in crisis. It was never really recovered, especially to political problems. Governor, mayor, and the president, they were always fighting. And you know what happened? Rio is very, very well known by its socio-economic inequalities. You have the favelas all around the territory. You have drug dealers. You have the militias, and everything that has been happening in the city. It's well known. This is a picture from the metropolitan area of Rio nowadays. So here is Rio de Janeiro. Sugarloaf is here. Here is the Christ. This is the bridge that connects Rio with Niterói, built during the military government. Here is Niterói, that used to be the capital of the state of Rio. Now it's a regular city. And this is the area of the metropolitan area. This is the Guanabara Bay. And the famous bays, Copacabana, Ipanema, they're all here. So it's this, most of this area, and this area, it was consolidated after the 60s with this kind of investment from national government in the area of Rio. So this is the metropolitan area of Rio today. So we left from this being the federal district, then a state, and then now you have this as a metropolitan area with almost a little bit more than 12 million people living on it. A lot of inequality. Unfortunately, the next one, it's in Portuguese, but just for you to have an idea. What happens is that everything only happens in Rio. You have the concentration of more than 70% of the jobs in the area, all the big avenues and all the roads, all the public transportation goes directly to Rio downtown. So the metropolitan area was never built or planned or developed as a metropolitan area. So Rio is still lives with the ghost of being the capital, because everything goes to Rio's downtown. It concentrates most of its population in urban areas. 7% of the internal product of the state, it's in the metropolitan area. It's a place of inequality, and everything happens in Rio downtown, that used to be the old city, the old capital. So when I think about the opportunity that you're having now of changing the capital to another place, I know that we have other examples, including in Latin America, that the capital of the country is one, the capital of the state is the other, and we have it in Buenos Aires. We have it in Chile, where the political capital, it's in Valparaiso, and but this process must be very well planned. Otherwise, it can be a disaster. And in the globalized world that we're living today, is where everything happens so fast, damage can be faster now. I'm giving you an example that happened 60 years ago, and I can tell you, Rio never really recovered of this change, especially due to lack of planning and for bad planning after that. And it's still a place that needs to reinvent itself, because what was chosen for it, and then I'm talking about oil and tourism, it was never enough to make this place survive of not being the capital of Brazil anymore. So thank you for this opportunity. If you have any questions, I'm at your disposal.
Thank you, Sid, for your amazing presentation about the story of Rio de Janeiro when they're relocating the capitals to Brasilia City. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I remind you, if you want to ask questions to both of the speakers, you can write in the chat column or raise your hands so you can ask it live in this session. So we start to check on the column in the chat column. There are already some questions here. First, there are questions from Miss Sarah Hoflich. I'm sorry if I'm said mistaken, from UCLG Barcelona. She asked about the she stressed about the Jakarta economy is also very linked to the service of knowledge and finance. Maybe this is questions to Mr. Dani. So how is the strategy considering the universities, for example? Maybe or am I take it wrong, Ms. Sarah? You want to add in your statement?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I would like to congratulate the speakers. These were very, very interesting presentation and very insightful. So I work in United Cities and Local Governments in Barcelona, and we also have a metropolitan chapter. And this, I think, is a very important analysis you both brought. I personally, I'm a German citizen, so also the experience with a reallocation of the capital, for example, 20 years ago, from the German capital was moved from a small city, Bonn, to a big city, Berlin. And the impact was in a way similar to what Sid is reporting. I think not maybe the impact of abundance as in Rio, because Bonn got a lot of specific funding exactly to mitigate this negative impact on the economy. There's no discussion. I think if the government is moving, people are moving who have a permanent job, who sustain an economy of services, who have a capacity of mortgage and for long-term thinking. So this is other people than the fast-moving people may be allocated to, for example, financial markets or banks. And this was for Bonn a very important. It's a small city, so they had to reinvent themselves and actually got a UN city, invest in university and in specific businesses with the country negotiated, for example, telecom, bigger companies, in order to sustain the international image and to sustain the economy. This is a small city, so it's different than to Rio. I think the example you choose to compare is absolutely valid. But for Jakarta, I know Jakarta has the biggest universities in the city, is a financial capital. So this all can remain, and the capital function, of course, of government officers, this will be a very big loss, but the university maybe can be a big alternative. And if you look in Rio, they were not able to have the top universities, to keep the top universities, because keeping top university remain capital of knowledge and of finance, I think is important to Jakarta. So I would like to know from Dani if there are strategies with the national government to exactly also then avoid that the university will just spread and leave Jakarta.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the questions. So please, Mr. Dani, if you want to respond of Sarah's questions and statements, and after that, maybe Sid would also respond to some of the highlights she given. Please, Dani.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the question. I think the government right now is plan to make still the business and finance center is still in Jakarta. And you're right that there is one university, and biggest in the nation is University of Indonesia, is located at Depok, surrounding Jakarta. And maybe also another university at Bogor, IPB, and very private university in Jakarta, and also it can, I think it can support Jakarta for the for supporting the business and supporting the finance, but for the exact program about the universities to become the one of its economic base, I don't think I don't know, but maybe it can be supportive for the business, of course, because we know the industrial area is located at Bekasi. It's near about 10 to 20 kilometers, Karawang, and also the main infrastructure is very complete in Jakarta. And right now, the toll road connecting Jakarta to Jawa Barat, West Java, and to the even to Central Java and Eastern Java. So the manufacture industry, the business, and the finance will still, I think, will still quite strong, because in Indonesia, the 70% is in Java, and 40% is in Jakarta and surrounding areas. So maybe linkage between the business, manufacture, industry, and university can be strong support for the existence and sustain of Jakarta.
Okay, thank you, Danny. I think you indirectly also answering a question from Pedro about the economic activity and necessary infrastructures for Jakarta. Okay, we move to comments from Sid. What do you think about Sarah's ideas or statements?
Thank you. Hi, Sarah. Good to have you here. Sarah reminded me of something very important that I forgot to say. Rio was never the financial capital of Brazil. It was always São Paulo. So this impact also, it was important because Rio was never the city of business. And in the 60s, São Paulo was already the industry, the financial, and the business capital of Brazil. And I think that must be considered once you have this. I have a few questions here. Was Brazil have a counter opinion the time they decided to move the capital? A lot of people, yes, but can you imagine that you have the challenge of building a new city in the middle of nowhere, making the country go west? How magic this was in the 60s, in the 50s when it was announced, and it was the years of development. So there was a lot of magic all around this, and it was a modern city. If Brasilia, it's still a place that everybody goes and say, wow, can you imagine it in the 60s being built, all that architecture? So it was controversial, but on the same time, a lot of people want to move there to work, to build this new country. Brazil was growing, was developing. So I think controversial was is the best concept for that time. But people that used to live in Rio, for sure, they hate the idea of moving there. And I remember the years I lived in Brasilia, I met a lady that she was one of those families that moved in the 60s. And she said that she reminds being the only kid in the block she used to live, because there was only one building in the block. And all the families, they didn't took their kids to that place. So she was the only kid in the whole block. So it's quite it looks like a fiction movie when you think about that. What do you think now, after years, was the purpose of the capital? It was the spirit of development. Even though there was a lot of risks and a very high social and economic impact and cost for that, it was the idea of moving Brazil into West, because you only have cities and development by the coast. So it was the idea of bringing development and making the country smaller, because Brasilia is in the heart of Brazil. And there was a lot of, and the military government did that. They did a lot of roads to connect that cross the whole country and pass through Brasilia. So all the automobile industry was involved in that process of industrialization and metropolization that was starting in the 60s. And so there was a lot of political and economic interests involved in that process. How Brazil does the risk of development regarding the gap? I'm from São Paulo. I live in Rio now for 10 years, but my father was from Rio, so I have the feeling that I'm part from Rio, and I can say that people in Rio, especially, they think that beauty worth everything. So the landscape, the beauty of the sea, the hills, the sunset, it doesn't matter if there are bullets crossing, but if you're looking to the sea, it's amazing. So it's worth. So they keep thinking that the economy can be based on this amazing view and this wonderful nature landscape. And yes, it can be, but not only on that. It cannot be the base of the economy. And if you want to make it the base of your economy, you need better investment, especially in capacity building of the people that work for tourists, because services in Rio sucks. It's very, very bad because they give you the feeling that they're making you a favor because you always want to come here, so you have to pay for that. It's totally different for other countries all around the world. So they still think that they had that feeling that everybody wants to come here, that everybody wants to live here, and it's not necessarily like this. I remember in the last review of the master plan of Rio, when you open the document, the first phrase, it was, the most important thing in Rio is the landscape. Then I have asked the guy who presented that, what about the people? So people, definitely, it was never a concern because they think that everything is related to the beauty of being here. So I don't know if there are, oh, Sarah asked if I have data on the average income situation in mortgages. I do have, but from now, not from that time. And how it worked at that time, I really don't know this information, Sarah. How was the service family who stay in Rio find solution? What happened? Yeah, they reunited and some people retired. Some people, they quit their jobs. And people were reunited by the time the infrastructure was ready, but it took some years because there were no schools or places to buy food. It was adequate places for a family to live. And what also happened is that small offices remained in Rio for several years. So most of the ministries and foundations, they still have a small office in Rio, and people who run for those places, they kill themselves to get the openings in Rio, because there's, yeah, when they go for it, they want not to go. Nobody wants to live in Brasilia, even though I was very happy by the time I lived there. Nobody wants, if there's an office in Rio, everybody wants to come here. And a lot of people that are from Rio, they still run for those positions because they, by the end of the day, they expect to have good average and find this place. But it's quite difficult. And recently, in the past 15 years, there's a reduction on these positions in Rio because it's very expensive to have those buildings and infrastructures and kind of very small use. And in terms of land, a lot of land and buildings in Rio are from national government, or they are public buildings, or they are military buildings. So you have several areas and neighborhoods that most of the land belong to national government.
Okay, thank you, Sid, for answering all of the questions in the column chat. So I come back to questions from Mr. Harry to Danny about the recent pandemic situation. Is there a lot of contra opinion? Danny, do you think that will there still be a realization in moving the capital out of Jakarta? This is the most important questions have happened here in Jakarta. Or maybe Mr. Harry himself want to add something about the questions. So this is our last question session, I guess, because the time is running out.
Okay.
If you want, Mr. Harry, you want to add some more?
Yeah, it's okay. It's already stated right.
Okay, thank you. So Danny, please respond to the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Harry. I think the move capital from Jakarta to East Kalimantan is very political, and maybe with this current situation of pandemic, then the budget and etc., the public may some of the maybe half of the public not support the program, and the president and its regime I think just have 3 years to realize this program. If 2024 the capital is not moved yet, maybe I think it's will not move. But I don't know. But if the president or its party winning the election 2024, it maybe still can be programmed. And the second, what do you think Jakarta will be after? I think just like I said before that different from Rio, which is the economic base is just the government activity. Jakarta, everything is in Jakarta. The business, the industrial, manufacture, financial center, everything is Jakarta. And if the capital move, I think Jakarta will not lose its strong support. If we see about the GDP in Jakarta, for the government activity, total government, local and national is 5.1%. So if maybe the national is half of it, 2.5%. So it's just 2 and 5% loss. Still, we have to study deeper about the linkage from the government activities to another social economic activities. But I think Jakarta will still strong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danny, for responding the questions. So for the last session of our webinar tonight or today, I will give the floor to Pedro about to closing statement and what do you think about the relocation of Jakarta in the next future? Is it possible or what it needs to be added to the plan? Please, Pedro.
Thank you, Fadli. Well, it has been a very interesting, outstandingly interesting session. I would go on for hours because there are so many questions about these effects, no? But we must realize that, well, Indonesia in 2050, and I am talking of memory, I might make a slight. Indonesia is going to be the fourth country in the world because it's huge and it's growing. It's going to be China, the United States, India, Indonesia, Germany, France, England, and Mexico. So Indonesia and the capital of Indonesia is going to be a very strong force in the world, no? And so it is very, very important. There are countries where the political power is so overwhelming that the economy follows the political power. In other countries, no, the private sector has much more independence of its own. So the danger in Jakarta is that if the capital moves, a lot of the economic power of Indonesia will move to the new capital, no? And as Sid mentioned, even if Rio was not the economic capital of Brazil, Rio has never from that Brasilia capital move, no? And that's the question for Jakarta. Is Jakarta going to suffer from that shift of activities, that loss of centrality? Obviously, the history of Jakarta, the importance of Jakarta is because it's the trade, in the main trade routes of maritime freight in the world, and that is not going to change. And the maritime freight is growing, but planes and plane freight is growing much more faster, no? And wealthy goods move in planes, not in boats. So, is going Jakarta to suffer, or is going to Jakarta benefit from the fact that the actual pressure Jakarta is on population growth and so on is going to ease, and Jakarta is going to be able to manage better the pressure that now is overwhelming and is not able to manage. So there are so many issues around, no, that we could go on for hours, but I think that we have put the main elements in place to follow up, and maybe the IMF will follow up with other discussions of this type. So interesting. And the last comment that well, some of these new relocations have been failures. I am thinking about Argentina. No, they tried to create Austral in south of Argentina to take some pressure out of Buenos Aires, and they failed. So I don't know if Jakarta should bet for the failure of the new capital, or really want to bet on the success of the new capital. And my last question for Sid would be, if we don't have time for answer that, Sid, so it would be just 2 or 3 sentences. If really you think that Brasilia has been a failure in the long term, not by architecture, because obviously the architecture of Brasilia is a moment in history that is very interesting and is worth studying, but has it been a failure in terms of the efficiency of the investments that the whole country has put in Brasilia, and have those investments have the returns in economic, social, and political, institutional terms that were expected, or you think it is not worth producing new capitals after effort it requires and the limited returns it brings? So these are the big questions. Just 2 sentences, Sid, and we close up, we wrap up this very, very interesting discussion that, as I mentioned, we will follow up. We will do other webinars, webilogs. The IMF will do other webilogs in this issue, because there is a lot to talk about it. Sid?
I think it worked in the sense that the country went west. But we are talking about the 60s of the last century. I don't know if it would work now, and I have no idea what would happen to Rio if it was remaining as capital. But for this country, it really worked to move capital west, because it brought development to that area of the country and made it more accessible. But we can keep on
Thank
these
you,
discussions.
Sid. Thank you, Sid. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Fadli, for organizing this, and thank you to Mark, for being the president of the IMF, and for all the attendees. We expect you in other meetings like this, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pedro, for your closing statement and opinions. Thank you all of the speakers, Mr. Sid Blanco and Mr. Dani Mutakin, for giving such a tremendous presentation today. So I want to give a suggestions about to all of you that haven't joined the International Metropolitan Fellowship. You can follow the 3 simple steps. First, you can enroll to the course in the YouTube by Pedro, the International Metropolitan Inception, and then get a certificate and commit as the fellowship in the IMF. Thank you. If there are no further ado, I will close today's webinar session. Thank you very much, all of the speakers and participants. Thank you, Pedro. I wish you good health, everyone. So Thank you. See you in the next webinar X series from the Australasia chapter. Good night, good afternoon, good day,
Thank
good
you,
morning.
Fadli. Bye-bye. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.